Does this video really need an introduction? The Yakuza games have gotten very popular in the last few years in the West, and if you're intimidated by the soon-to-be 9 main series titles, you can just go and play Judgment. Or rather, you should absolutely play Judgment because it's one of the best in the entire series. With one of the most fleshed out stories in Yakuza history, Judgment has some of the best characters and twists despite having essentially no connection with the mainline titles. By trading the ruggedness of Yakuza's style for something more sleek without pulling any punches, Judgment is able to focus on telling its plot of conspiracy and betrayals without being too contrived, which, quite frankly, is a rarity for this series. Yagami, the protagonist, being nobody at the start of the game, unlike Kiryu, means the mystery aspect is a massive strength and allows all the pieces to fit together in an order that flows naturally and makes Kamurocho feel actually dangerous at times. Yakuza groups that would be nothing to Kiryu have real presence, which is so refreshing. Also, the combat's pretty good. Judgment is a marvel with how excellently its conspiracy plot unwinds, creating some of the most memorable characters in the entire series. It has a combat system that feels satisfying and uses its mechanics to expertly develop a brand new protagonist. Not to mention the studio's masterful implementation of side content that the Yakuza games are famous for and only continue to improve upon. Yakuza isn't for everyone, but if you're new to the series and don't know where to begin, Judgment is probably the best place to start. It even has an English dub that's apparently pretty good, so if you're not into reading hours of dialogue, there you go. It's undoubtedly one of the best stories in a video game about a detective. Objection! Judgment actually has quite a lot in common with the Ace Attorney series beyond lawyers with unrealistic haircuts. That's not really a surprise though, seeing that the Ace Attorney series is pretty stylish. Despite originally releasing for the Game Boy Advance, it's impressive how well they're able to communicate a courtroom drama with only a few sprites. Every single character's personality is conveyed perfectly through a few animations that they each have with screen shakes, flashes and controller vibrations punctuating a character's emotion. The sound of these games feels so right. Sound effects make otherwise static scenes feel so much more impactful. Everyone knows about the whole objections and whatnot, but it's worth mentioning them because they are great. Even though they're visual novels, it's able to feel tense and exciting because of how strong the sound effects, zooms and table smackings are. Not to mention the soundtrack, which is phenomenal. A lot of major characters have their own themes and they're all so good. When the pursuit theme comes in, you know it's time to watch someone have a meltdown, which is all made so much more memorable by having unique animations that play only very briefly. They so expertly designed the game that it doesn't feel limited by the hardware it was originally released on. It's aged spectacularly. In some cases, you're outright told who the perpetrator is, but there's still so many revelations in trying to uncover the truth. Each case leads into the next smoothly and logically, but they're distinct enough where you don't have to remember plot details of one case for another. Inside the courtroom is definitely where it shines. Putting together all the pieces found during the investigation sections of the game into an order that vaguely makes sense is a lot of fun. While speaking to all the wildly different characters to get evidence, sometimes the linear way that you have to talk to people to progress can be frustrating. Even in court sometimes you'll notice a contradiction but won't be able to point it out for quite some time until the story decides it's time to make that connection. Those are really just minor issues though, because Ace Attorney is a blast to experience and I've only played the very first game. I can't wait to get to the rest, and hopefully by the time I've finished the trilogy, the rest of the series will be available on modern hardware. The second half of the series isn't available on anything except mobile for some reason, but like, how wait Capcom, just release it on Steam already, come on. I only played The Last of Us for the first time in 2022. Sounds like heresy, but I didn't own a PlayStation for a while, so to be clear, I played the PS4 game The Last of Us Remastered, not the PS5 game The Last of Us Part 1. I'm not that gullible. Cost of living crisis, by the way. When I first started the game, it was around May time. I played the opening couple hours and walked away thinking, wow, this is crap. After the prologue, the game was so sluggish with nothing to do but hold up as you're slowly introduced to the world and its uninteresting combat while I was crying, bloody hell man, why is the game so boring? So, like any responsible person, I stopped playing the game. But for the 3 months that I stopped playing the game, It was stuck in my head. It never seemed to fully escape my mind. It's received so much praise, and I've enjoyed games similar to it in the past, so surely there's something there that I'll enjoy. Eventually, I decided to try the game again, and before I even started, I told myself that I'd try to blast through the entire game in a single day to be able to say, even if I didn't like it, that I gave it a fair chance. Surprisingly, it didn't actually feel like that long of a day because I finally understood it. I mean, I still don't understand why people call it the best game of all time or whatever, and its story life-changing, but I did like the game. I even started to enjoy the combat near the end, which, that was impressive. What's also impressive is how well The Last of Us is able to tell its story and get you to really care about these characters in a relatively short runtime. It's full of tropes, but they're executed so cleanly with great acting that they aren't a fault but a strength to help elevate the relationship between Joel and Ellie. The story skips through time quite a bit, which I was apprehensive about at first, but it's fine. We only really get to play the most important events on the journey, though it does flow smoothly. Even without seeing every little thing, you get the gist of how the character dynamic evolves. Well, except for that one point when Joel gets injured, which could have used more explanation for how Ellie's been doing, but otherwise it's fine. I brushed it aside, but it's worth bringing up that The Last of Us did get a remake last year, and each time that I remember it exists, I'm just puzzled as to why. The Last of Us, even though it is a PS3 game, it's a very nice looking PS3 game. Sometimes it's a really nice looking PS3 game, so why remake it? It's great that it's coming to PC 6 months after launch, but I just don't get why you couldn't have ported the remaster. I'm generally quite positive on remakes, including some of the more controversial ones, but I really am just perplexed. It has more accessibility options, which is great, but I imagine it would have been less work to fit them into an update in the remaster. I can't say that I know the studio that well though, so maybe everyone working there was really excited to rebuild such a popular game from the ground up. It's just that from my perspective, I'd rather play a new game because Naughty Dog are pretty good at making these types of games, and The Last of Us is proof of that. No, because I don't want to take up too much of neither your time nor mine, and I have a lot more games I want to say something about, how about we blast through the next few? Resident Evil 5 doesn't know what it wants to be, so it decided on being RE4's worst section with so much mindless action that it's hardly Resident Evil anymore, but punching zombies is cool! Cutting the limbs off of monsters in Dead Space rather than just popping them in the head is a great twist. The lighting and shadows are very effective at creating tension, but the PC port is inexcusably bad. Pistol Whip is essentially Beat Saber, but gun that I found surprisingly fun, and it became one of my favourite VR games, even though I'm not very good at this sort of stuff. A Short Hike is most certainly a short hike, but it's very cute and I liked it a lot. The visual style of chunky pixels is so comfy. Neon White, once you get past the anime woo dialogue, it's very addicting to try and get the best times by using guns in new inventive ways. The Look At is a parody of puzzle game The Witness that was funnier than I expected it to be and ends in the most juvenile way possible, yet I couldn't help but feel it was deserved. Switch Sports doesn't have the charm or goofiness of the original Wii Sports, making it an infinitely less exciting game than it could have been. Sifu has a really fun combat system, I'm just not good enough to use it and had no desire to beat the game by going through the same level over and over again. It's not for me, but it's definitely a great game. Same thing for Hades, I say the entertainment, just not a fan of the repetition. Half-Life 2 VR is just a mod, but it makes the game feel so drastically different I couldn't help but mention it here. It works surprisingly well, but unfortunately it gave me COVID, so I never finished it. Crash Bandicoot 2 and 3 certainly feel like PS1 games, and Crash 4 put the fear of wooden boxes in me. Horizon Zero Dawn is very boring, and I didn't care about its world or story in the slightest because Aloy just wouldn't shut up, but the robot dinosaurs are cool. After owning the game for 6 years, I finally finished Super Meat Boy, and it wasn't even that hard, I don't know why it took so long. Power Wash Simulator sounds like a joke, but it's actually a really relaxing game, and it was the only game I played back when I had Game Pass for a month. The Shadows of Rose DLC was alright, with one superb section in the middle where they played on my expectations of the base game's dollhouse, perfectly designing an insanely tense level. And Cuphead finally had its delicious last course after 49 centuries. It's short but contains some absolutely incredible bosses, and it boggles my mind how they will make such mechanically complex bosses with such intricate art while making everything readable for the player! I got a shiny Eevee while making this video. It turned into a Sylveon. Isn't that cool? When I was like 5 years old, for the very first time I discovered Sonic Adventure 2. Sonic Adventure 2 is cool, and when I was younger, the coolest part of pretty much every Sonic game from the 2000s was the main theme. Starting up the game and getting blasted with Live and Learn, there's not a feeling quite like it. The final boss of these games then had the main theme with vocals, and I tell you what, it was amazing. Call it cringy or whatever, but it was cool. It made the fight so intense, and the last Mario game even did it, so you know it was cool. I bring this up because a video about 2022 would be incomplete if I didn't mention Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, would it? Yes, it's a nearly decade-old game, but I and many other people played it for the first time only this year, and I loved it. And part of why I loved it was because the boss fights reminded me of the first time I heard a Crush 40 track. The boss fights of Metal Gear Rising are the reason you play Metal Gear Rising. There are levels in between the bosses and they are good. Tearing apart enemies to then crush their robot spines screaming bullseye never gets old, but the boss fights. Most bosses only show up very briefly, but each character is so distinct and eccentric that they're instantly memorable and recognisable. The plot's all fun and games until it turns into a weird terrorist thing with stealing children's brains or something. The only problem I really have with the game is that it struggles to teach the player. The controls tutorial for parries is worded quite strangely, but forcing players to learn it through the monsoon boss is fair enough. Metal Gear Rising is just a straight up great game, and I'm glad it got the popularity boost last year that I was finally able to play it.
Okay guys, now it's time for the grand finale to the show.
Despite having all the odds stacked against it with releasing so early in the year with so many performance problems on both PC and consoles, Elden Ring. Oh, Elden Ring. Right before the game came out, I made a video where I talked about my experience with each of From Software's Souls-like games, and I'm glad I did because Elden Ring is sort of the culmination of all of that. There are elements from all of these games, from blatant reuses of enemy movesets to the general flow of combat. Not to say either of those things are bad, it's a welcoming sense of familiarity, and if having to reuse assets is what allowed them to create such a massive game, that's fine by me. That's Elden Ring's most impressive asset. The credits in this game nearly don't exist because the game nearly doesn't end. All the previous games have had labyrinthine level structures where you're traversing through a compact space composed of tightly designed paths. Elden Ring has an entire continent's worth of stuff. Limgrave is an enormous region dense with content, yet it feels pitiful when you get flung to the other side of the world. It's remarkable how big this game is without feeling terribly bloated. Almost every corner has something in it, not necessarily something tangible, but something that presses the buttons in my head that says you found something of value. I loved running into every wall to try and find the edge of the world, yet I never did. From Software have always been able to create a few incredible moments in each of their games when you encounter new areas, but every single time you find something new in Elden Ring, the view is immaculate. Combining a colour palette infinitely more varied than any Dark Souls game with the sheer scale of the world stretching out to these stunning landscapes make each inch of the lands between instantly recognisable and genuinely jaw-dropping. Riding around on horseback in this world is nothing short of magical, and almost the entirety of that 100-hour-long first playthrough felt like I was doing something worthwhile. But eventually that magic runs out. Of all the things I expected out of Elden Ring, that wasn't one of them. I'm not even sure how to fully describe it because it's something I've never felt with any of From Software's previous games. Dark Souls 2, as controversial as it is, I can keep starting a new save file and have a lot of fun. I don't think Elden Ring is quite the same. And I keep trying to come up with reasons as to why, an explanation as to why it didn't hold my attention for as long as other Souls games. I thought it was the more linear final act, I thought it was the repetition of mini-dungeons, I thought it was the story. It took a long time to realise that none of those things truly made for a worse experience. Because it's not a worse experience. The highs of Elden Ring are monumental and show the studio's talent and mastery of their own genre. The E in Elden Ring stands for exploration. That is the game's core pillar. The size of this thing still astonishes me. The most tragic thing isn't a narrative thread like it might have been in prior titles. It's the realization that you'll never be able to really explore the lands between ever again. The first month that the game was released, Elden Ring was all that I thought about. More so than any other game, I wish I could forget everything and do it all over again. It's not a feeling you get very often. The joy of discovery makes Elden Ring fantastic, and if you haven't played it, seriously give it a go. Try not to get scared off by the difficulty or anything you might say online. Just go off and have an adventure, because that's what it is, an adventure, and it's so good. I haven't mentioned every single game that I played in 2022, mostly to avoid redundancy, but I think that still shows that there is such a massive variety of games that you can play that it's impossible to talk about all of them. Every so often I see people talking about how there's nothing to play or how every game is the same these days, and I can't help but look at people like that and think, what a moron. I know it's mostly streamers that do that online, but if you look in replies, you always see normal people do that. The library of games is so suffocating that there's almost too much stuff to play. It sort of makes me uncomfortable to think about how in my lifetime I'll probably play less than 1% of the games that currently exist. 2023 is looking like a ludicrously good year for games. A lot of remakes, which I get a bit more wary of every week, but the entire year has stuff that almost looks like it was designed personally for me. The games that I played this year, I try to pick them based on games that I've not really tried before, hence Phoenix Wright, which is a visual novel which I've never played before, but I'm glad I did because it's really good. And hopefully I'll actually get to make more videos this year. I only made 2 last year, which I'm upset about. I'd like to make more videos about games that actually exist as well. The 2 videos I made last year were just about Elden Ring before it came out, and Resident Evil 4 as soon as it got announced. So maybe actually talk about games that exist. I do have ideas for videos that I'm quite excited about. Hopefully they'll be done in time, unlike this video. In review, 2022 was an okay year. It went by way too quickly, but nothing terrible really happened, and 2023 looks like it'll be way more exciting in terms of releases for both video games and videos on this channel. God of War did a grapple hook. That was cool.